Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, July 14th, 2020, where two laypersons, a pastor and an academician, gather for about 55 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is July 19th. Each Tuesday, we simply call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, it's 5:30 a.m. Our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year A, and if you're focusing on the Gospel Lectionary this week or preparing for a virtual discussion group during the pandemic, we hope this will provide areas of focus and reflection. Here's our approach. We work independently in advance of the call-in with some preliminary information or questions on what the leadoff person on the call would like to discuss. We then develop perspectives, share, encourage, challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Bill Hall.
Charles Willard. Sorry.
Sara Mickelson.
And I'm Don Upton, and it's good to see all of you, my friends. And today we're going to be working with a parable in Matthew. We're going to read from Matthew 13:24 through 30. We're going to skip a bit and then pick up with 36 through 43. And you think, what are we skipping? And part of what we're skipping is the mustard seed, which we'll come to next week. And I've asked my friend Sara Mickelson to help me with the reading, so I'll pick up the first bit, and then Sara will pick up the second. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while somebody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore again, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the household came to him and said, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered them, An enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, When then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in the gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.
And then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. And he answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the ages, and the reapers are angels. So just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all the causes of sin and all the evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let everyone with ears listen.
Thank you, Sara. And I've got three questions I thought we'd use to frame the discussion. But before I lay them out, let's go to Charles Willard to get some perspectives on the first century and the parables. Hello, my friend.
Hi. I wanted to make an observation here, which is probably in most church circles would be surprising, to put it neutrally, but and annoying or frustrating or just wrong, to put it more directly and specifically. I want to suggest that when you think about how all these stories about Jesus, of Jesus, which we study in the New Testament, our preformed way of imagining them is that the four gospel writers were all with Jesus throughout the whole period of his ministry, and were making notes about what he said and what he did and what they did. And then years later, put those notes into a more coherent form, which we have now as the Gospels. And so we think of the text that we just read as being Matthew's record of that particular instance in which Jesus was presenting this parable, and then explained it. I'm going to suggest an alternative interpretation, and I think that Matthew has, in effect, laid this out for us quite carefully. Because what I think we have is not Jesus speaking to the public and then Jesus speaking to the disciples apart from the public to provide them secret information. I think what we have is Matthew's record of Jesus' presentation, which is very neatly captured in the first part that was read, verses 24 through 30. And then what happens is that we have Matthew's interpretation of that saying of Jesus, that parable of Jesus, in verses 36 through 43. It does provide a fairly dramatic way of seeing how what Jesus has done, what Jesus is presented here as saying, is in the first part, is more clearly what a parable is about, and what the normal parable was, the way it was constructed, that is without explanation, and then the elaboration, which is the more, well, the alternative to a parable would have been an analogy or an allegory, and Jesus was not known so much for allegories as he was for parables. The parable is one straight thing. This is the way it is. The sower went out, he sowed the seed, and then later something happened, and people came in and, I need to be excused for a minute. I'm sorry. So go ahead, please. I'll come back to that.
That's fine. We'll pick you up where you left off. I'm going to go to those three questions that I thought we could use to guide this today. There's something different about these three questions today because you could start on any one of them. They're meant to overlap or collapse into each other. The first question is, some believe the parable is related to a specific problem in the church in the late first century. And we're wondering here if that's the case, a problem in the church, in Matthew's church of the first century, how does that apply to our reading in the 21st century? Question two is, should we lead to the end of the age and the reaping as we read this text, or is there some value in considering the patience and the waiting over time? Can we cut to the chase here without the growing together into the harvest part? And then question three is looking at some interpretations. Must we assume people and individuals are exclusively tares or wheat? Or is this another more excellent dimension or alternative, the way to read this? Is it just exclusively tares or wheat, weeds or wheat? So those are the questions I thought I would lay out today. And this first question is about the first century church or Matthew's church. If there's a problem he's addressing, and you don't have to agree with that, what would our reading be? And Bill Holt, could I start with you? What's your thoughts on this?
Yes, excellent set of questions, Don. And I do believe that Matthew was likely addressing a problem within the church. I've mentioned before that in my seminary training, more than one of my biblical professors said that they thought that much of the New, if not all of the New Testament, was written, at least in part, to address conflicts among believers. For example, to challenge the heresy that developed that Jesus wasn't truly human. He was truly God, but not truly human, so-called docetism, denying the humanity of Jesus. So I have no problem believing that. The other point was we often cannot be certain what the conflict was or what group is being addressed. So I think both of those are true. Here's something that came to mind as I mulled your question. There's a principle in psychology, sociology, counseling that I found in my training to be very helpful. Behavior is a function of perception. If I perceive you as a threat, it really doesn't matter if you are one or not. I'm going to act on, I'm using an extreme example to make a point. So how I perceive something, I'm not going to say controls, but very much influences how I act. And one of the applications of that, at least in counseling and in relationships and conflict management, are your perceptions accurate? Okay? And so I think Jesus is addressing that. If I perceive someone, however we want to interpret the weeds or the tares, if I believe an idea or a person or a group is counter to what should be going on, that's going to shape how I act toward them. Likely empower me to become judgmental, maybe even separate myself from that. And so I do believe Jesus was addressing a problem then, however we want to interpret and use parables. And so Jesus is, for my part, challenging the disciples' assumed perception. You think about it. This motley crew of disciples are special. However you want to cut it, they are the 12 most close to Jesus. They're traveling with them. And in these, at least in some of these parables, it's the disciples who ask for an explanation, and Jesus offers it to them. Now, I haven't checked. There may be some parables where Jesus explains it to the other listeners. I'm not sure about that. So it seems to me to be in the in-group, there's a temptation to think, I got the truth. And anybody who doesn't see it my way is outside the pale. I also believe that a common, not that it's not done today, but a rhetorical device was to speak in exaggerated terms. This is exaggerated. There's the good seed and the bad weed. And I see if I can find it. Yeah, one of the scholars, one of the resources I looked up says, based on the Greek word for weed, that it was, I don't know this word, a darnel, that it, yep, in its stalk and grain, it looks like wheat, except the grains are black and the weed is harmful. So in other words, it looks like the real thing. There's a slight difference. It reminds me of meeting a person once who was an expert on mushrooms, and he showed me some examples of how a healthy mushroom and an unhealthy one might look very much the same. So again, it's getting at perceptions. And Jesus does offer judgment, but not on my timeline. And we'll get to patience in another question. It reminds me of Lincoln's second inaugural address, and I'll quote just a couple of sentences, maybe some of the best-known sentences from that speech, talking about the Loyalists and the Confederates. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes God's aid against the other. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has His own purposes. For me, if Lincoln didn't have this parable in mind, it somehow influenced what he was saying. I think that in some ways, if it's not the essence, it's certainly something of the spirit of this parable.
Thank you. How about you, Sara? First century, 21st century?
Yes, that's my answer. I think that Matthew's church does not have a corner on this market. I'm not confident that Matthew's church is the only one where the members are found in a mixed state. I think that we spend a lot of energy, Bill, addressing perceptions. I think that we often are the one we think is right, and whoever we're working with that we have a perception of that's oppositional to us, we perceive them to be a threat. I think that our concern here is to what end do we work through this particular parable? I think we all, if we were to think about this with an authentic third eye, if there is such a thing, we might see ourselves vacillating between behaviors that would lead others to think we are weeds and behaviors that we perceive are in the pursuit of wheat. And I wonder if anybody else feels that way, that you are caught between two perspectives of your own self, and you might still be seeking the world's charms while you're choosing to follow Christ. So I spent a lot of time in that headspace, and considering my own. And you guys will probably go, well, that's typically a Sara thing to do, to spend time in an interpersonal moment considering my pursuit of Christ and my distraction with the world. And in growing up as hopefully a wheat, am I not enamored with the things that weeds do or weeds have or where weeds grow? And the charm of weeding, if there's such a thing, not pulling up weeds, but enjoying being a weed, we may look at that and ponder that they seem to have more fun, those weeds. And so I spent some headspace time thinking about vacillating between the two and pondering the idea, can you be a little of each? And I think Matthew's church is right there.
Thanks. Oh, by the way, Charles, I know you wanted to pick up where you left off. I see your hand up. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to jump in here and to comment. Even the disciples, if you think about it, the 12 disciples were wheat and tares, or wheat and a tare in one group, and the tare didn't get displayed and dealt with until the very end of the process, although the tare was there and making his contribution or non-contribution as well. It was a contribution at the time. So it's a mix. As I'm thinking about the parable as a parable, that is the first half of the text that we read, I think Jesus is saying that for observational purposes and for practical purposes, observational being, can we tell, at what point can we tell where the wheat is as opposed to the tares? But the second point, where can something be done about it, which is not until the end. And that's exactly what happened with Judas, as we know. But he was there. One question, which I'm not going to try to explore now, is that did Jesus know all the time who the tare was, or did that come along? Judas didn't start out thinking that he was a tare. Judas started out thinking that he was wheat, if you can put it, squeeze it into the parable, the terms of the structure of the parable. It's only when the real wheat went the way that Jesus was taking them that Judas realized, he didn't think about it this way, of course, but that Judas realized that he was, in fact, everybody then perceived recognized that Judas was a tare. How? By his outward actions.
Thanks, Charles. And I've been enjoying the kind of an ecosystem read of this, the wheat and tare together, all together. It's kind of like I'll give it a you and all of you reading. Sarah, since I'm from the South like you, will say you and y'all. And it's kind of like the Creator saying, look, do you see the ecosystem in which you live? And do you see the ecosystem where y'all live? And what judgments are each of you making? And does the field, this ecosystem, actually look like the ideal that you have in your little noggin? And the field that I imagine being in, the entire ecosystem made up of all these things, is actually not what's sitting there growing. It's like I'm standing on a hill. The Creator goes, now, what's in your head, what you think you are, and what you think the world should look like is not what I'm looking at down here in this field. So it's kind of a reality check. Where do you live? And by the way, whether you're looking to the past, the perfect field, or the future, the reaping, you're taking actions, harmful, impatient actions, based on what's in your little noggin. And then I would look and say to the Creator, well, I'll be the judge of that. And the Creator goes, I don't think so. There's the field. There's the ecosystem. That's real, and that's now. So that's kind of my quick read of this. And I want to go on to the second question, which is very closely related to it. Sarah, I'm going to go to you first on this. Should we leap to the end of the age and the reaping, which everybody likes cutting to the chase, as we read this text, or is there value in considering the patience and the waiting and the vision of the sower over time? I mean, can we cut to the chase without the growing together and the harvest part? I mean, I thought that would be a nice softball for all of us. So, Sarah, why don't you kick this one off?
I'm going to go with no, that we shouldn't leap, because there seems to be a direct instruction to wait and watch. So I have had the privilege of working with some brilliant teachers. And I watched a brilliant teacher who was teaching a section of history and a section of literacy around the Salem witch trials. And the teacher walked in, and it was a Monday, and they normally took tests on Friday. And the teacher posed the question, there seems to have been some cheating on the test last Friday. And I'm not sure which one of you is actually the perpetrator of the fraud, but one of you led a cheating ring on the Friday test. Now, I'm going to leave you alone for about 5 minutes, and I would like the cheaters to present themselves for adjudication. And then the teacher left the room. And you might, as you might imagine, some concerns broke out in the room. Who did this? Who led this? What happened? How did we? We've got to do something about this, because all of us are going to fail. And that's the mandate. The teacher said, all of you are going to get Fs unless the people who perpetrated the fraud step forward. And it was interesting to hear how the dynamic in the room changed from being cooperative and collaborative into being much more competitive, much more judgmental, and stereotypes started emerging. And after 5 minutes, the group had pretty much determined who the cheater was and pushed the child forward to convince the class that this child had done this. And the teacher went, guess what, everybody? You just acted out the Salem witch trials. Nobody cheated on Friday. And the perspective being, and these children are much older. These are not young children. So please don't be afraid for the child. But the perspectives were, when you're under duress and under stress, your judgments kick on, and you tend to fall back upon stereotypes. And stereotypes are perceptions that are likely not true. There might be some evidence, but the perspective being, maybe you're wrong. And more often than not, you're wrong. So if we go with the default that we should not be the ones that weed the garden during the growth, I would go because our perceptions are generally wrong. And it's hard when our perspective is as a wheat or a weed standing next to someone else to have the wisdom to know which part of it is the pulling part and which part of it's the leaving part. So I think that this is a wonderful instruction. We are not enabled to be judges. We are only enabled to follow the sun and look for that growth.
Thanks. Bill Hall, cutting to the chase and forgetting the patient journey. It's all yours, brother.
Thank you, Sarah. That was powerful stuff. One of the challenges of being on this is I want to take notes while you're talking. So I guess I'm going to have to listen to this later and pick up my notes. I've got another kind of story to share in the next question that's similar to yours, Sarah. Now, getting back on track, should we wait or get ahead of it? And of course, the clear message of the parable is to wait, so I vote for that. Because of his economy of words, I'm going to read a brief quote from Mark Davis in not the commentary on this passage, but an article in a thing called Political Theology Today. While one's natural reaction is to rid the world of evil, the reality is that evil's root system is so intertwined with the kingdom that the unintended consequences of such actions are devastating. In fact, this is the powerful sentence. One completes the enemy's work by trying to separate the wheat and weeds prematurely. Now, there is a sobering thought. It's one thing that your perception is inaccurate. I quoted that behavior is a function of perception. That counseling parable is not intended to say your actions are justified, your perceptions are accurate. It's really intended to motivate people to question their perceptions and to test them. And the thought that in one's zeal for good, one is helping evil succeed, to use that kind of either-or language. And I just amazed at how relevant this is to today. And I don't need to get in, I'm sure I don't need to illustrate how various people believe they have got their hands on the weeds, and if only they can succeed, all the weeds will be gone and it'll be only wheat. And it is destructive. I think we are seeing some destruction in this day and time that will be very time-consuming to heal if we ever choose to make choices for healing. And I'm not going to belabor that point, but it really stirs in me an awareness of the difficulty of patience and the importance of patience. And I loved your analogy, Sarah, and I couldn't take the notes fast enough, but to face the sun, let ourselves, am I getting your quote somewhat accurate? I'm sure I'm butchering it a bit. Now, I can't prove this, but when I look up the word patience in Greek, all languages combine words. And while I can't prove it, I have some reason to believe that the Greek word for patience is two separate words that basically meant anger withheld or delayed, or frustration delayed. Now, whether or not that's accurate, I think that's what patience is about. Patience doesn't mean I'm totally calm. If nothing is bothering me, can you say I'm patient? To me, patience means something is challenging me to be angry or frustrated, and I'm choosing not to act on that. perception. And having sat through some exams for ordination of ministers, I have seen some people real good at grabbing weeds and trying to yank them up, and not so good at nurturing the wheat. A whole other subject, and that we'll get to it in the next question, is are we only wheat or only a weed? I'm some of both.
Thanks. I was thinking about what leads up to, if you cut to the chase, that second part that Charles was talking about, got a first and a second part, that it's not one thing and another. There's actually, I think, three things. So patience is rolled up into, I think, the middle. So the first part is the sowing of the perfect field. That's part one.
Yeah.
And the end of that part is it's corrupted, it's attacked. So first is perfect field, ready to go. Which, by the way, as a metaphor, is a little strange because, and I'm pushing it a little bit, Charles, but there's no such thing as a perfect field. And I think we're asked to imagine ready to go, perfect field, God's field, the Creator's field, ready to go. And we're going to raise...
There was a perfect field.
Okay,
there was a perfect field. There was a perfect field. There was a perfect field.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
right.
So you're saying, yes,
right.
that was a perfect field. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking, all right,
it was called Eden.
Yes. Oh, I'm so happy that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and He saw that it was good, and so that's the end of part one. Part two, corrupted, and that's where we are, and that metaphor isn't pushed for the human being. I understand because that field looks more normal. Maybe it's a little more corrupt than usual, but fields have weeds. It makes sense to me. That's what the world looks like. But I might be reflecting in my little noggin on part one, the perfect field. And so in that second story, the metaphor works very well for me because I have some understanding what the field looks like, and the servants go, we need to take action. And I think where the metaphor gets pushed in the second part is I choose to believe that when they say we've got to pull them up now that they've appeared, that it's clear to us they're there, that is the right thing to do. And I grew up thinking, well, they're wrongheaded. They're not playing the role they should play in time. They're not being patient. No, I think they're doing the right thing. I think when they walk away after being told to wait, that they're looking at you going, oh, gosh, you've got to be kidding me. And the reader is going, the sower is wrong. Then part three is a perfect harvest, which I don't understand as much. The metaphor doesn't actually work because there's no such thing as a perfect harvest. The only place where the metaphor really works in terms of real facts, real nature, real ecosystem is the second part. Well, my little noggin is going back to Eden, and my little noggin is going up to the perfect harvest, and it doesn't work. So in those three parts, that helped me.
Excuse me.
Yeah, Charles, yes, please.
I'm sorry to keep you jumping in like this, but doesn't it not work? It does work, because what happens is that by waiting, we just haven't gotten to that point in our history yet where the harvest is complete, because the parable, this is what we're not supposed to be doing, the parables, but we're doing it, so it's okay because we're doing it. At the end, it worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. Namely, it was the wheat that was harvested and the tares were destroyed. And so the wheat came out as they would have had the tares never been sowed among them. That was the point. So that you're concerned about, it did. In fact, it worked out quite right. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. And I want to say, for the purpose of behavior, because I think if you look at Matthew's church and what we've all been talking about is the potential to say, I'll be the judge of that, looking backwards into something that's hard to understand and looking forward into something that's not our job. I go, I'll be the judge of that. The Creator goes, no, I don't know what. Like when I was a kid, somebody would look at me and go, what's in your head? Where is your head today? And I think this says the church's head is in Eden and the church's head is in the reaping, and that means you're doing a tremendous amount of harm to each other right now. Mm-hmm. And so my sense is that I'm standing on, the Creator takes me out of the field. I'll just make it personal. The Creator says, where's your head? Or y'all, where's y'all's head? Come up on the hill with me and let's look at this ecosystem. What do you see? And I think the answer is, well, I judge that to be the potential for a new Eden. I see that for the potential of being the reaping. No, that's the field down there. That's the ecosystem where you live. That's where your head should be. You need to serve each other with patience and kindness, and don't be uprooting things. You're doing a tremendous amount of harm to each other. That's where you are. It's this beautiful reality check. And thanks for the affirmation, Charles. I think if you take it to 3 parts instead of 2 parts, then you can look backwards in the mind, and you can look forward, and that's not actually what we're being asked to do. So let's continue the conversation with the third question. Looking at some interpretations, do we have to assume that the people, the individuals, are exclusively tares or weeds or wheat? Weeds or wheat? Or is there another, and I put in parentheses when I sent this out, a more excellent dimension or alternative how we read about this? Because I think if you cut to the chase, it's like, oh, it's very clear. Weeds, tares, weeds, tares. But what about today's ecosystem? So, Sara, can I start with you on this one?
Sure. I have to tell you, I listened to the Followers of the Way conversation videotaped yesterday, and I was really
for the listeners of the podcast, Followers of the Way, Palmacia Presbyterian Church, palmacia.org is where you'll find that conversation. Go ahead, Sara.
And they have their conversations on Monday, and our conversations are on Tuesday, and so it's a lovely entree into how to consider what we're looking at today. And John Debevoise, I just adore his perspectives and his humor and his humility as he presents his kind of conversation. He shared that when he and his wife were first married, his wife Emily encouraged him to pull up what she perceived to be as weeds in the front flower beds, and they were called periwinkles, and take those out because they were weeds. And then he says now, I don't know whether it's the evolution of their marriage or the evolution of horticulture in Tampa, but now they buy periwinkles at the local home improvement store and plant them. So it made me wonder, in my thinking, what the definitions between wheat and tares might be, and how flawed that perspective might be, and how in the short span of a marriage lifetime, something can move from being a weed to something beautiful, like a flower that you would plant to decorate your yard. And it made me think about the beauty that weeds might bring that might transform them from a perspective of being a weed into a perspective of being wheat. And I pondered that for quite a long time, and I said, can we really, with confidence, determine which we are? And I went, no, I don't think so. Because we are, our own self-interest is underlying or undermining our thinking. And so I wondered if something that was sown with evil intent can transform into something that shines like the sun at harvest. And I thought about the life of Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul, and how deeply different he is from his first iteration that we saw in the New Testament into the very prolific writer that we have gotten all these wonderful letters from. And I thought about the character of Pinocchio and how in the beginning Pinocchio seems to be swayed by anything that happens around him, and in the end his decision-making changes to save the life of Geppetto. And that's interesting to me. And so I spent some time thinking about the story of the Salem witch trials and how perceptions can cause people to be harmful to each other. And this idea that Saul could move to Paul and Pinocchio could become a real boy. And I'm pondering, what am I being transformed into? So I am spending a lot of time thinking about how do I help others look to the sun versus how do I help others look at each other and point and say, you're wheat, you're weeds, you're wheat, you're weeds. And I'm thinking that it's all about where my head's, if I could borrow Don Upton's beautiful line, I'm going to turn your little head so you can see this. So I'm thinking about the Creator going, I'm going to turn your little head so you can see the sun and not be distracted by what everybody else is doing.
Well, Sarah, and I'm surprised you said I'm a real boy without doing Pinocchio. There must have been
I'm a real boy.
There you go. That's what I was waiting for. And you, Bill Hull, it's your turn now.
Can you be a real boy too?
Well, I'll give it a go. I think the spirit of what I want to share, Sarah, is going to echo you. First of all, I want to go back to something I said last week that my very intelligent wife challenged me on when we were listening later to the podcast. She, shall we say, is not a morning person, so we watched this together later. I made the point last week that we are the soils, and she correctly noted for me that the scripture has Jesus saying that we are the seeds. So then she said, what do you make of that? And I said, there's an organic interaction between seeds and soil. That, I think, is the point of that parable. It's that interaction that occurs. So ultimately, yes, you can pull the plant up, but at some point they are inextricably bound together. And if you interrupt that, you cut off the life of that burgeoning plant. And I think something of that is at work in this, because I think I said last week, we like to assume we are the good soil, or we are the seeds that land in the good soil, but I think I'm all for. I think there is something of wheat and weed in me. There is something in me, I believe, that understands and embraces the fullness of Jesus Christ, and there's still parts of me that resist, and I probably don't even know that. That's part of the struggle of the human experience. And for me, I tried to sum it up this way. The journey of following Jesus Christ is a grace-filled adventure involving ambiguity, uncertainty, struggle, and challenge. And through it all, we can be confident that there is one whose wisdom is greater than ours and whose will ultimately cannot be thwarted. I really believe that. It is grace-filled, saved by grace, not by works. But some of my favorite words, ambiguity, uncertain, struggle, challenge, which is why we meet each week. Because if we had the delivered final word of God on all this, we could just publish it and put it out there for all the world to read. We wouldn't need to engage in this dialogue that we do. And again, I hearken back to Mark Davis's that we can do the enemy's work by prematurely yanking up what we perceive to be the untruth. Now, one other quick example of what you were talking about, the teacher and the Salem witch trials. My wife and I just finished watching an 8-part series called Unbelievable. Now, I'll tell you, in case you rush to watch it, there's some really rough language and some rough stuff in that. It's a true story about a young teenage girl who was raped, and the police ended up convincing her she wasn't, and she recanted and was charged with lying. Only later did some very persistent female detectives from different systems, with a lot of tension, they worked together and finally discovered who this perpetrator was. And because, at least one could understand, because the police bungled it so badly at the start, it allowed him a span of years to do this to other women. And in fact, to give away a little of the story, at the end they are convinced there are other victims, but they can't get into his computer to find the other victims. He was convicted and sentenced for life. And then, of course, the young lady was exonerated and given some financial remuneration. But the end of that is so powerful when she encounters the detectives who browbeat her into changing her story. And it's very powerful. It's a great example of the danger of rushing to judgment when what you perceive, because it was not just the detectives, some of her foster people also raised questions about her truthfulness because of her reaction. She wasn't reacting the way they thought she should. So there's a powerful parable, if you will, about that I think is a kind of example of this parable.
Thanks. And for those that are watching on Zoom or listening in on the podcast, there is a broad spectrum of commentary on wheat and weeds. It's not narrow. I mean, there are folks that go all the way with it, with just a kind of a binary view. And there's those that take what I'm calling the ecosystem view, that's in that middle of the three parts of this. And so I commend lots of reading if you're interested in this, but it's 1,800 years of taking positions in this, and it's interesting and it's heavy and it's challenging. For me, the idea that it is just a simple binary kind of breaks the whole metaphor apart about what's happening in the middle. It doesn't work. It's so shallow if it's wheat or weed at the end. As a matter of fact, it's a trick. It says, if you want to believe it's wheat or weed, then you're going to end up becoming a judge, and you're going to tear out the weeds, and you're going to do all those things that I think the church is being counseled about, and we're being counseled about in the first century and the 21st century. So I vote for ecosystem. Just a word on the binary. I think that connects with the 21st century now, Sarah. It's been an area of frustration for me, and I've written articles about this. That aren't you frustrated like me that you're given a binary of solving coronavirus or opening the economy? That's not true. I mean, as in, it's not one choice or the other. And there's 1,000 other things to think about. I don't accept a binary. I don't accept the binary of leftist or conservative. I don't accept the binary of Democrat or Republican. I don't accept the binary of globalism versus nationalism. It's not just a matter of nuance. I think it's a matter of living in the middle. Not the perfect field and not the reaping, but being patient and listening and serving each other. And so I think there's a binary here that it's like a trick. It's like, it looks so, you want to cut to the chase. Be the wheat. Put your head, where's your little head? Well, I want to be right there. But it's not about the binary at all. And I think it's maybe it's a challenge where with a lectionary, if you read just this, you throw out the book of Matthew and you're going to give yourself a binary, when the book of Matthew is about listening and struggling and suffering and empathy and the things that make the church work and make us see each other and be patient. So I think I'm going to tie it to another 21st century issue which is, by the way, when I say it's not true for any of those binaries, I don't mean I'm taking sides. I just mean if I'm living in that field, my little head is supposed to be every day considering the effect on my fellow men and women, and that's it. I'm not taking a position. I'm saying life is complicated, and I think when the Creator takes me to the field and goes, "What are y'all doing down there?" That's the message, to be perceptive, to listen, to care. So I've enjoyed this journey today. We're almost out of time, but let me go around to see if there's any other comment. And Charles, if you'd like to provide a summary. But first, Sara, Bill, anything else to follow up? Are we good?
So I'm just going to say that does not the body lie between the right and the left?
Right. It's kind of like people that say, "Oh, well, you're a left brainer and you're a right brainer." Like, well, that's actually, that's an analysis, but it's not. That's not. You actually have there's a whole you there. Thanks, Sara. And Charles, anything to wrap up or synthesize here at the end?
No.
Well, for folks listening in, Palmacia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose Street. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. And if you're listening or viewing during the time of pandemic, there are many resources there, and we commend that to you. When you hear Sara talk about the followers of the way, they're actually looking at the same passage. So there's other perceptions to see. There's sermons, reflections, prayers. So if you're looking for a place to land today on a virtual basis, we commend that to you. And you are always welcome, and we'll see you next time.